Hello, and welcome to Slate Money, your guide to the business and finance news of the week. I'm Felix Salmon of Axios with Emily Peck of Axios.
Hello, hello.
With Elizabeth Spiers of the New York Times.
Hello.
We have all manner of court cases to talk about this week. The Supreme Court has been very busy, and it's been talking about Chevron this and Purdue that and herring fishermen. It's all up for discussion, so that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to talk jurisprudence this week. We are also going to talk about stock market concentration and megacaps. We have a Slate Plus segment all about the humble spud, which apparently has gained in humility over recent years. No one loves it anymore. Be sorry for your potato. It's all coming up on Slate Money.
Today's episode is supported by What Should I Do With My Money? An original podcast from Morgan Stanley. Smart people often don't feel smart about money. Find What Should I Do With My Money on your favorite podcast player to hear from people just like you getting help from experienced financial advisors. Hey there, Slate Money listeners. Before we start the show, I want to let you know about a story coming up a little later. It's from one of our partners, SAP. AI comes at you fast. If you don't get reliable and relevant advice, your business might miss out. Whether you're looking to automate tasks or embed AI in your business processes, SAP can help. To learn more, head to sap.com/AI and stick around for expert advice on how to embrace AI with confidence.
So while the whole political world was freaking out about something, debate something, the Supreme Court was extremely active this week, and it's basically made the whole question of who is president much less important. This is my quick reaction to a couple of things. One ruling about SEC administrative courts and one bigger ruling about something known as the Chevron doctrine, which basically both of them say this massive executive branch that we have is too big and has too much power, and the only people that can really make rules are Congress and not the executive. And Emily, does this mean that maybe the presidency and the executive branch and the way that we're used to America running is like, this is the end of the road?
I don't know, Felix. So I think you're right to the extent that the Supreme Court is clearly in getting rid of Chevron deference and in curbing the SEC's power. And another decision this week, the Supreme Court is very clearly curbing the power of the executive branch and usurping that power for the judicial branch. Sonia Sotomayor called it a power grab in her dissent in the SEC case. And power grab, those two words are getting thrown around a lot. But the question is, there are these, 6 conservative judges clearly all year, last year, are skeptical of the power of the executive branch, the power of the president and all these agencies to put regulations into place that they don't like. But my question is what happens when a new party comes into the Oval Office, that when a Republican comes into office, they're happy with what they're doing. So all of a sudden the assault on the executive branch maybe slows down. I mean, the precedent that they tossed out on Friday, this Chevron, which basically says in cases where the law is murky, defer to the agency, that was created during the Reagan administration. I guess what I'm saying is the assault against the executive branch going to end when the partisan status of the White House flips?
But you also have to consider, we have a conservative majority on the Supreme Court, and most of these people are not going to leave anytime soon. So one of the significant outcomes of this is that the judiciary would have so much more power than it has right now.
Yeah.
And so conservatives would still dominate, decision-making on that front. And if you look at Kagan's dissent, she said, the majority basically disdains restraint of any kind. And they hate the administrative state. And so they're basically just giving themselves exclusive power over every open issue, no matter how expertise-driven or policy-laden, and turning itself into the country's administrative czar.
Yeah.
And she sounds furious in this defense, but it also sounds terrifying. Do you want Brett Kavanaugh deciding, complex healthcare issues? it's just mind-boggling. Even on an ideological basis, it sounds dangerous, and it's just going to create large-scale disruption, I think.
There are two different types of conservatism in America, and I think that there's a significant difference between sort of MAGA electoral congressional conservatism on the one hand and judicial conservatism on the other hand. The Republican Party in its current incarnation is quite activist and has a whole bunch of laws that it wants to pass and things that it wants to do, and is not really a small government party. You know, Donald Trump significantly expanded the size of the government, and the more sort of small c conservatism that I see from people like, I don't know, Sam Alito or someone like that is much more in line with this Chevron ruling, which is just basically saying, like, we don't want the executive branch just kind of getting out of control. And I think they would be okay, Emily, to your point, I think they would be okay with a bargain which basically said, if we constrain the ability of the executive branch under a Democratic president, then it will also be constrained under a Republican president. But Elizabeth's point is well taken, that they're probably just going to uphold what they're more likely just because of their sort of inherent biases to uphold whatever the Republican president does.
Although I'll argue with myself, because they don't even like it when Republican presidents do anything, because
exactly, yeah.
2 weeks ago, they overturned this regulation regarding bump stocks on rifles that turn rifles into semi-automatics. And it was a regulation from the Trump administration that curbed the use of those things. And the court overturned that. So, maybe Felix was right all along, which pains me to say, I guess. But
well, I think among the Republican Party, there's a kind of knee-jerk hatred of any kind of administrative power that isn't concentrated, primarily in Congress, but they're fine concentrating it with a conservative-oriented judiciary too. But part of what they're reflecting is what kind of baseline Republicans believe, which is that the administrative state is bloated. People like their local politicians, but they hate politicians in general. And the further up you get in the government, the more people have these ideas that, the government is bloated and corrupt. And the final thing is just that most people don't really understand what these agencies do. I have mixed feelings about Michael Lewis, but I think he wrote one of the best books about the Trump administration that wasn't about the Trump administration, called The Fifth Risk, where I think he went into these agencies thinking that he was going to find a lot of the stuff that, Republicans complain about, a lot of waste and corruption, blah, blah, blah. And he ended up writing a book that basically defended the administrative state, because in doing the reporting, he learned a lot about how much expertise has to be built into these agencies. And also that they don't really turn over, as many people as people think they do when the president changes or Congress shifts.
Yeah, I'm reminded of Rick Perry. Remember him when he ran for president and he was like, I'm going to abolish the Department of Energy. And then he got put in charge of the Department of Energy. And about, a week and a half after taking up that position, he was like, holy shit, this is not only incredibly important, but we do incredibly good work and we need more money and we need to expand the Department of Energy. and this kind of thing where I think you're absolutely right that and Michael Lewis saw this and lots of people have seen this. And like those of us, I was just on a call earlier with Emily when she's like, oh, I love the Bureau of Labor Statistics. They're great. Like there's a lot of deep expertise and very, I don't know how to put this, just incredibly professional people in the government, and this ideological mistrust of anything administrative and anything executive branch. It really is based in ideology rather than in any kind of like empirical evidence of overreach. And I think what we see in the SEC case, which was narrower than Chevron, but is kind of illuminating, is the SEC, has a bunch of good professionals in it, and they have their own little sort of administrative courts which can administer fines and stuff when people do fraud. And the Supreme Court basically said, yeah, like you guys know what you're doing, but you're not part of the judicial branch. You're part of the executive branch. And just for that reason alone, You shouldn't be allowed to do that. If you want to go ahead and fine someone, you need to find a judge to administer that fine, and that judge needs to be in the judicial branch, cannot be part of the SEC. And this is all like a high-level ideological debate that, you know, might make sense in some kind of a civics textbook, but like given where we're at, you know, these things are always path dependent. It's going to just make it incredibly hard for the government to do its job in practice. And I think maybe that's the point. If you're like Charles Koch or someone, that's what you want.
Yes.
Well, also between the Chevron and the SEC ruling, you know, if the point of the SEC ruling is to argue that people who get charged with fraud deserve a jury trial every single time, it's just going to flood the courts. I mean, they're creating a sort of unsustainable situation where, you know, we already have a stressed judicial system, but now that everything has to be litigated through the courts and agencies have no discretion, it's just going to jam up the judiciary in a way that I don't think we are really prepared for.
Well, on the flip side, I mean, the court has basically been operating as though Chevron didn't exist for a while now. It's issued, like, for example, the knocking back the Biden administration's student loan rule was kind of like ignoring Chevron without ignoring Chevron, you know? And like in the SEC case, I spoke to a former staff attorney at the agency, and he said, you know, it's been clear for a while that the court doesn't like these administrative in-house SEC courts. They don't like the administrative law judges. So the agency, the SEC, has been taking any big case to court and not using the in-house system. So, I mean, is this going to be a radical change with cases flooding the courts? It might not be so radical. Like with so many Supreme Court rulings, it might be like this like slow burn that, you know, you don't realize that the soup is really hot because you're sitting in it, kind of a thing. And I'm reaching for an analogy. I'm sorry.
The thing that strikes me about this, like, if you look at the cases that went up to the Supreme Court, which resulted in this Chevron strike down, they were, you're going to love this, that they were about herring boats. This is a classic little like corner of the government that no one ever thinks about, right? And there are quotas on herring fishing. I'm going to get this wrong, but broadly speaking, there are quotas on herring fishing. And if you're going out to fish for herring, then you need a federal observer on your boat to make sure that you're not fishing too many herring. And the agency in charge of placing federal observers on boats basically said, well, when we put a federal observer on the boat, you need to pay $700 a day for that federal observer, you know, because they need, you know, hotel rooms and transport. I don't know, whatever. And the herring boat lobby, you know, big herring boat, decided to sue and say, like, there's nothing in the law about $700 a day. And all of the courts using Chevron, which is, you know, has been the law of the land since 1983, basically said, well, this is a reasonable thing for the government to do, is to, like, you know, recoup its costs by charging the herring boats $700 a day. And it made its way up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court basically said, well, it may or may not be reasonable, but it's not in the law. And the only person who can make the law is Congress. And if Congress wants you to charge $700 a day, then they need to pass a law saying you can charge $700 a day. And in a world where Congress was capable of passing laws, that might make sense. But we are not in that world. And instead we are in a world where I think Congress has passed fewer laws in the past few years than like at any point in American history. Like, there's something boring and sensible that would probably garner bipartisan support under any normal Congress, like, you know, the herring boats have to pay $700 a day, would never pass because it just doesn't have, like, it's just so hard to pass anything. And so that kind of thing, it reminds me in a weird way of how the MMT folks are like, well, you know, if inflation looks like it's ticking up, then Congress should just like cut spending. And you're like, well, maybe Congress should cut spending, but there's no way that they actually will. That's just like not how Congress works in the 2020s.
Or they're like, they should just raise taxes a little. And you're like,
exactly.
Have you heard about Congress? Do you understand how things work here in the United States?
Well, also, you know, another thing to consider is that the agencies exist for a reason, because something like a $700 a day fee for, you know, fishing boats is a little bit small potatoes for Congress, which already has a backlogged, agenda and bills that go nowhere. It just doesn't have the capacity to interpret in a way that actually involves expertise and subject area knowledge every teeny tiny thing that people are allowed to do in a regulatory basis. That's part of the reason why we have these specialized agencies that can adjudicate smaller issues like that.
Yeah, we have Chevron because, Congress passes laws that are hundreds of pages long, and we need an agency with expertise to interpret them. And you can't go back to Congress on every little $700 fee to pass a law. I mean, that would freeze everything.
So I guess my question is there a world in which Congress can basically enact Chevron into law? Is there a world in which Congress can pass a law saying it is our congressional intent that executive agencies broadly have a certain amount of discretion to interpret what we write because we don't know how these things are going to play out in practice and we have more important things to worry about, like getting reelected? So, because the Supreme Court keeps on deferring to what Congress says, is there any way that Congress could effectively reinstate Chevron by passing it?
In theory, yeah. But what's the likelihood that would happen?
Does the Supreme Court even defer to Congress? I mean, in the SEC decision, it was over, the SEC's ability to hear these penalty cases in-house, right? That was a new ability passed as part of Dodd-Frank. So even in a case where Congress explicitly said, this is what I want the SEC to do, the Supreme Court was like, no.
That's a good point. That's a very good point. Yeah, it seems that they're happy to ignore congressional intent, even when it's quite clear if it doesn't align with their ideology. Let me move on while staying with the Supreme Court, because I think, and again, I'm super interested in what you two think. I think that these Supreme Court decisions, both in the Chevron case and in the SEC case, can broadly be construed as being business friendly in a kind of laissez-faire sense, insofar as businesses can now go ahead and do what they want without having to worry about government agencies cracking down on them so much, because the powers of government agencies have been constrained by these rulings. And the reason I bring this up is because friend of the pod, Mitu Gulati, put out a really great paper a couple of years ago, basically saying that we have an incredibly business-friendly Supreme Court. We've talked about this on the pod, actually. And whether they're Democrat appointees or Republican appointees, they generally wind up leaning in favor of business.
Before we get to the break, I want to tell you about our Slate Plus segment for this week because pretty hilarious. I convinced Elizabeth and Felix to talk about potatoes because there was an article in Wired about the humble potato. And we talk about why it's not as popular as it used to be and about why potatoes are an economically significant vegetable. Slate Plus members will get to hear that at the end of the show. If you're not a Slate Plus member and you don't want to hear ads right now and you want other great Slate stuff, you should sign up for Slate Plus, because with Slate Plus, you get ad-free listening on all Slate podcasts. And right now, you really need Slate Plus because of the unmatched Supreme Court coverage that Dahlia Lithwick and Mark Joseph Stern do. It's a really important time, I think, to sign up and listen to them break down all the chaos that's been unleashed in the past few weeks. With Slate Plus, you also get unlimited access to all Slate.com content and a members-only newsletter and an exclusive bonus segment in every regular Slate Money episode. Sign up at slate.com/plus. That's slate.com/plus. When it comes to your finances, go for the credit card that's always there for you. With 24/7 US-based live customer service from Discover, everyone has the option to talk to a real person anytime, day or night. Yep, that means no more waiting for, quote, normal business hours just to get a hold of someone. We're talking real service from real people whenever you need it. Get the customer service you deserve with Discover. Limitations apply. See terms at discover.com/credit card. Today's episode is supported by What Should I Do With My Money? an original podcast from Morgan Stanley. Smart people often don't feel smart about money. Find What Should I Do With My Money on your favorite podcast player to hear from people just like you getting help from experienced financial advisors.
So the other ruling that we should talk about on the pod this week is the Purdue Pharma Sackler family ruling about the proposed bankruptcy settlement there. And I guess the first question I want to ask, because this was a very kind of bipartisan ruling, it was 5-4. It didn't seem to split across any kind of like Republican Democratic lines. Would you consider that, Emily, to be a pro-business ruling?
That's a really good question. And I don't think the Purdue decision is a pro-business ruling. So it was a 5-4 ruling with Justice Jackson joining the majority, which was some of the other conservatives. And exactly what Felix said, they curbed the power of bankruptcy court to shield debtors from immunity. And companies have been using, and some would say abusing, the bankruptcy court for years, dating back to like the asbestos claims, using bankruptcy as a way to shield themselves from, dealing with the consequences of their actions, essentially. Especially you could see that in the Purdue case. And this was a case, where the Supreme Court was like, no, you're going a step too far here. And they did curb the power of the bankruptcy court and limit what companies can use those courts for.
The way I read it, and I might be wrong about this, but the way I read it is that they are okay with the bankruptcy court giving debtors broad immunities. They're just not okay with the bankruptcy court giving non-debtors broad immunities.
Right. Yes. But that is what the bankruptcy courts have been doing that for years since asbestos.
Yes.
We read that really good op-ed from Melissa Jacoby, a law professor at UNC, and she sort of laid out the history here, going back to the asbestos claims. There was a company that filed for bankruptcy to shield itself from all the victims, going after it, and not all the victims signed on to that because they didn't know who all the victims were at the time. So what they did was come up with this workaround where they created a fund, like a victims fund, where future people who had been harmed could go and get payouts, and the fund ran out of money and it didn't pay out very much, and it wasn't very successful. Yet that's how a lot of these deals got structured going forward. And it seems like the Supreme Court in this case was like, that's not the way we want to do it anymore.
I'm not sure I agree with that. I think the Supreme Court would still have been okay with that because that's the debtor. That's not a non-debtor. And you can still, the way that bankruptcy works is that when a company has a whole bunch of liabilities, it can basically say, I don't have enough money to cover all of these current and future liabilities. So here's a bunch of money to cover them. And then I'm just going to continue as a going concern free of those liabilities. And I think that's still allowed. The big question in the Purdue Pharma case is Purdue Pharma is the debtor, right? That it has a bunch of current and future liabilities, which are basically all tort liabilities in terms of claims they have to pay to people who died of opioids. There is also a non-debtor in that case, which is the Sackler family. And as part of the proposed settlement in that case, the Sackler family would voluntarily give up $6 billion of their own money and say, we're going to throw this into that kind of fund that Emily was just talking about, which will then pay out to the victims of opioid abuse and whatnot. But in return for paying in that $6 billion, we will get immunity and we will be protected from future lawsuits against us from people who died of opioids. And the Supreme Court basically said, well, you can't do that because you're not the debtor. You're a non-debtor. So that's a stretch too far for a bankruptcy court. And I can kind of see why they said that. But if they don't have that immunity, then they have no incentive to put any money at all into the fund. And this is why the vast majority of opioid victims were in favor of the settlement and wanted to give the Sacklers that immunity.
I guess the broader thing I was thinking about last night is just and everyone should go read this Melissa Jacoby op-ed, but the bankruptcy system, the bankruptcy courts, this is not a place for the opioid litigation really to wind up. And maybe, Felix, you'll disagree with me because, Purdue was never going to have all the money to pay back all these victims. I mean, they caused, thousands of deaths, sparked a nationwide drug crisis. I mean, caused untold pain. And for some reason in the United States, we're set up where companies and wrongdoers get punished, in the courts. It doesn't seem like bankruptcy court is the right place to work out these issues that are complicated and deal with human lives and are different from like the credit stack of the creditors.
Well, the thing is, it violates the intent of the bankruptcy process itself, which is to restructure companies so that they can continue to survive. And Purdue was not, I think, suffering financially. It's not like they would have gone into bankruptcy were it not for, all of these lawsuits. And they had to argue that the potential liability was enough to sort of justify the bankruptcy. And that's not, the point of bankruptcy law.
Yeah,
no,
yeah, exactly.
Okay, so I'm happy to take the other side of this one because I think that exactly is the point of bankruptcy law, right? The point of bankruptcy is that when your liabilities exceed your assets, then not everyone with a claim on the company will be able to be paid out on that claim. And because the claims in the US judicial system on Purdue are basically unlimited, because we have these juries who will award hundreds of millions of dollars to like individuals, and then we have millions of individuals who are affected. The size of the claims against Purdue is unlimited. And, just mathematically speaking, if you have unlimited claims against a company, the company cannot pay all of those claims. So you need some kind of a mechanism to divvy up those claims fairly and to basically say, like, it's not just a rush to the courthouse and whoever gets their claim in first gets paid out in full, and then everyone who's at the end and there's no company left anymore gets nothing. That's not fair. And so the fair thing to do over the course of the jurisprudence of the past few decades has been to use the bankruptcy courts to create a much more equitable distribution of claims. And I think they've done a pretty good job.
Well, the thing is, though, you're talking about, there's a difference between liabilities that the company currently has and then theoretical possible liabilities. And this is where I think, the case is a little bit less straightforward because Purdue is arguing that, their theoretical liabilities, not what they've already been sued for, what they already owe, were going to be so big that they should be allowed to use bankruptcy to shield them from liability. But if that's, if you only need to have theoretical liabilities or possible additional liabilities to qualify for bankruptcy, I think that goes against the intention of the law too.
Then you wind up with companies just running to the bankruptcy court instead of, paying victims and making things right. They're preemptively going to the bankruptcy court to like hide out basically and like save their asses.
You see, this is something which I feel is over-egged a little bit. Like, filing for bankruptcy is not a clever little Texas two-step, shuffle that cunning companies do to save money. Like, filing for bankruptcy is a really big step that no company particularly wants to do and only does it when it feels it has no other option. And the first thing you have to know about companies filing for bankruptcy is that 99 times out of 100, all of the shareholders in that company are wiped out. They all get zero, right? They're the first people to lose all of their money. And companies are run by their shareholders. The boards of directors are elected by the shareholders. The chief executive reports to the shareholders and is tasked with maximizing shareholder value. If this idea that the company is just protecting itself and being selfish by declaring bankruptcy and wiping out its own shareholders, it's like, well, that's a good indication that they're taking this really seriously.
Even so, in looking at Purdue, what do we make of the Sackler family? They themselves haven't filed for bankruptcy. They thought they could use the Purdue bankruptcy to shield themselves from liability. And as far as I know, and correct me if I'm wrong, and hold on to quite a lot of money.
Correct. So the Sackler family is a super interesting case. And this is a hard case. And one of the reasons why, the court split in an unpredictable way and is also like not a great case to be setting a major precedent with, to be honest, if you're the Supreme Court. What happened with the Sacklers is that their shareholding in Purdue did go to zero. Purdue did file for bankruptcy, and the equity holders, the shareholders, the Sacklers, were zeroed out. But before Purdue filed for bankruptcy, it paid like $11 billion of dividends to the Sackler family. So now the Sackler family is plenty rich. Even if its shares in Purdue are worth zero, they have $11 billion of cash sitting in their bank account, right? And so what the opioid victims are quite reasonably saying is you wound up dividending out a whole bunch of profits to the Sacklers when, in fact, that money rightfully belonged to us because we are victims and we have more claim on that money than the Sacklers do. So they want to be able to sue the Sacklers for a bunch of that $11 billion. And for that reason, you're absolutely right. The Sacklers were like, well, how about we basically give you back half of the money? We'll give back $6 billion. And you can use that, as the vast majority of the pool of money that would then be used to pay out. But in return, you give us the immunity and allow us to sit on the other $5 billion and be dynastically wealthy for the rest of our lives. And you can see how that leaves a bad taste in the mouth of a bunch of people. But yeah, the alternative is that the Sacklers put in nothing. They open themselves up to future litigation. But so far, they haven't lost a case as far as I know. Like, so far, no one has found the Sacklers personally liable for any opioid victims. I might be wrong about that. But even if they have, they have more money than the victims do, It's hard to create a class action against them. I'm sure the Sacklers would love to just put this behind them at a cost of $6 billion. But they certainly don't want to live in a world where they pay $6 billion into a big settlement fund and also are liable for the rest of their lives. Like that, there's no reason for them to do that.
Well, now that's the world they are potentially faced with. Now they're open to lawsuits.
Yeah, so now they're open to lawsuits, but they have $11 billion to fight those lawsuits.
Well, and another factor is that a lot of the plaintiffs are actually governments that are suing Purdue. So they object on the basis that that's different from, an individual suing Purdue, where they don't believe that the Sacklers should be shielded from liability if the plaintiff is the government. So the states are also, several of the states are suing Purdue.
But no, as I understood it, the states were overwhelmingly on the side of the plaintiffs here. And it was the states who wanted this settlement.
Yeah, they were part of it. Mm-hmm.
And the Supreme Court basically went along to the states and all of those 48 attorney generals or whatever it is and said, well, we know you want this, but fuck off.
You could kind of see both sides of it, why you would want it to happen and for victims to get some money and to put this in the rear view. And at least we have a concrete agreement, half the Sacklers' money, etc. And then you could see it from the other side where it doesn't seem fair that this family gets to hang on and be dynastically wealthy. And there are these victims that haven't come forward yet. They've done so much harm. It doesn't seem fair.
Well, the victims who haven't come forward yet are also covered in this settlement. Not all of the $6 billion gets paid out to existing claimants. There is money left over for future claimants.
But if you wonder if it's the same thing with the asbestos, where the fund runs out of money.
Of course, by definition, the fund will run out of money. We know there isn't enough money to go around. That is why there's a bankruptcy case in the first place. If it doesn't run out of money, then that's stupid because you just have money sitting in a fund in perpetuity.
More of that sweet, sweet Sackler money.
But can we at least agree that this is a gnarly enough case and a weirdly unique enough case that it's a bad case to use to set a broad precedent about the power of bankruptcy courts? I think bankruptcy courts in general have shown that they are quite wise when it comes to divvying up set of assets, and they've done a quite good job of it. And what the Supreme Court has done here is basically tied one hand behind their backs and made it much harder for them to do their jobs. Slate Money is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. You are probably multitasking right now. You're doing something else. You're driving or cleaning or exercising or maybe even grocery shopping. But just so long as you're not in some kind of moving vehicle, there's something else you could be doing, which is getting an auto quote from Progressive Insurance. It's super easy and you can save money by doing it right from your phone. Drivers who save by switching to Progressive save nearly $750 on average, and auto customers qualify for an average of 7 discounts. Discounts for having multiple vehicles in your policy, or being a homeowner, or more. So multitask right now. Quote your car insurance at progressive.com to join the over 28 million drivers who trust Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and affiliates. National average 12-month savings of $744 by new customers surveyed who saved with Progressive between June 2022 and May 2023. Potential savings will vary. Discounts not available in all states and situations.
Today's episode is sponsored by the ASPCA Pet Health Insurance Program. Your pet is part of your family and you want the best for them no matter what. But vet bills can really add up. That's why you should check out pet insurance. And with ASPCA Pet Health Insurance, you can focus on the care your pet deserves and cover what matters most. The ASPCA Health Insurance Program offers customizable accident and illness plans, making it easier for pet parents like you to help your pet get the care they may need. The ASPCA Pet Health Insurance Program has been around for over 18 years, and they've helped more than 600,000 pets during that time. They allow you to customize your plan, helping ensure that your pet's plan is as unique as they are. Because vet bills can really add up, especially when you're least expecting it. It's simple. Use their app to submit a claim and you'll receive reimbursement for eligible vet bills directly into your bank account. To explore coverage, visit aspcapetinsurance.com/slatemoney. That's aspcapetinsurance.com/slatemoney. Again, that's aspcapetinsurance.com/slatemoney. This is a paid advertisement. Insurance is underwritten by either Independence American Insurance Company or United States Fire Insurance Company and produced by PTZ Insurance Agency Limited. The ASPCA is not an insurer and is not engaged in the business of insurance. Get 3% daily cash back when you use Apple Card to buy a new iPhone 15 or pair of AirPods at Apple. You can choose to grow it at 4.4% annual percentage yield when you open a savings account through Apple Card. Apply for Apple Card in the Wallet app on iPhone. Subject to credit approval. Savings is available to Apple Card owners subject to eligibility. Savings and Apple Card by Goldman Sachs Bank USA, Salt Lake City branch. Member FDIC. Terms and more at applecard.com.
We can move on to the stock market because now everyone's business friendly. The stock market is hitting record highs. Yay. This is good, right? One interesting thing that I've been writing about is that the thing that has been driving the stock market to these record highs, and the reason why the American stock market in particular has been outperforming virtually every other stock market in the world, is this thing called megacaps. And megacaps was not really a word a few years ago because you didn't have a whole class of companies that were worth trillions of dollars, but now you do. You have 3 companies that are worth $3 trillion, which are Apple, Nvidia, and Microsoft. You have Amazon just became worth $2 trillion. Google is in that kind of ballpark as well. And you get these massive technology companies, and they're all technology companies, with these $1 trillion market caps. And normally in the history of capitalism, when you become inconceivably enormous like that, that means you start growing more slowly. You know, like big things grow slowly, small things grow fast. It's like babies, you know? But it turns out that in corporate America right now, it's the other way around. The astonishing growth is being seen in companies like Microsoft and Nvidia, and not so much in the young baby mammals who are just starting out. And so there is this very sort of top-heavy stock market that we have right now, and I don't think there's a consensus on whether that's good or bad. Emily thinks it's bad, right?
I mean, it just at a gut level, I feel, yes, that it might be bad, in part because so many fewer companies go public now. It seems like maybe just like the political sector, the stock market is stagnant dominated by these big elephants, and there's no young babies coming in to grow, and that might not be good for like growth and dynamism. And
except, I feel like Nvidia is a really good counterexample to that. It grew into an elephant, and 3-4 years ago it was not an elephant.
I also think that the market sometimes views potential growth by, how much these companies are really putting into R&D or cutting edge technologies. And I think the AI hype is part of what's driving it. It sort of makes a large company like Microsoft seem like it has the dynamics of a smaller startup.
Yeah, in AI in particular, the amount of growth, the capital cost of investing in AI is absolutely enormous, which is why, when Elon Musk starts up his own in-house AI company, he raises $6 billion for it, because that's how much it costs to start up an AI company these days.
That actually goes to my point, because it's like usually when you have a new technology, you have a lot of new startups and companies and a lot of dynamism. I don't know why I keep using that word, dynamism, of the startups and the new companies, and they go public and it's like, it's a whole new thing. It's very exciting. There's all kinds of growth. But with AI, it's just like these big honking elephant companies. Yeah, they're doing something new and it feels fresh, but it's still like the old guard, just like gobbling up the startups and whatnot.
But who's the avatar of AI? It's Sam Altman, who has this, startup called OpenAI.
It's heavily backed by this old company called Microsoft, So it is a startup, but it's not like the kind of startup that, we once saw back in the 90s.
Not being developed in a garage somewhere.
Yeah.
I can see the concern, but broadly speaking, I think that I'm quite sanguine about the rise in concentration in the stock market for a couple of reasons. The first is that Nvidia to one side, all of these other companies that are being sort of re-rated and adding trillions of dollars to their market cap on the basis of AI are not adding that market cap because AI has made them more profitable. They're adding that market cap because, something's on something, AI hype something. And they're spending a lot of money on AI, and all of the money that they're spending is going to help companies broadly. It's going to improve productivity broadly if it works. And the, consensus in the stock market seems to be that it will work. And I just don't believe that these big companies like Apple and Amazon and Google and Microsoft have the ability to really collect rents on AI to the degree that they wind up getting most of the benefit from it. If you think of the benefit that corporate America, say, got from Microsoft Windows or Microsoft Office, that's, 3, 4, 5 orders of magnitude greater than the amount that Microsoft could charge for those products. And AI is similar, right? Like, if this works, then sure, they will get some profits from it, but corporate America broadly will see the benefits. And this is why I think that, like, we're just in sort of stage one here of the sort of stock market AI boom, which is the tech stocks get the first lift. But then if and when AI turns out to be something really real, then it starts lifting up everyone else, and everyone else becomes more productive, and everyone else's stocks will rise. And then, we just started seeing that with Apple, right? Apple is not really an AI company, but it announced a couple of weeks ago that it was going to start putting AI stuff into its iPhones. And it got a $300 billion boost in the stock market as a result. And if Apple, obviously Apple will be one of the first companies to do it because it's a tech company, but eventually, Nike will do it and Walmart will do it. And they're all, Target came out and said, we're going to AI this and AI that. And for the time being, it's hard to separate the hype. But eventually, when it starts showing up in the bottom line, then the concentration of the stock market will decline because everyone else will go up, assuming that this AI hype actually turns out to be based in reality.
I guess on the flip side of your Felix optimism is if it is in fact just hype, then the bottom falls out and these companies lead the stock market down.
Correct. If the AI bubble bursts and it turns out to be a nothing burger, then yeah, Microsoft goes down in value, OpenAI goes down in value, Nvidia goes down in value, and you get the mega caps will go from like being worth $3 trillion to being worth $1 trillion. And like that is fine. You know, that is the kind of losses that like capitalism is good at taking. Those are high risk investments. We saw actually, this is a really good example. Just this week, just over the past like 7 days or so, Nvidia lost like $300 or $400 billion of market cap. And you know, it's a volatile stock. This happens. It's no big deal. But that's the whole point. It's no big deal. And as it was losing all of that valuation, the stock market was going up. Like it didn't actually seem to visibly hurt the stock market at all.
I guess when I hear the word like concentration, company corporate concentration, I am newly trained, courtesy of all the people and good thinkers on antitrust now, to think about all the ways in which corporate concentration, sector concentration is damaging to the economy. But this is a reminder, once again, that the stock market is not the economy. And I don't know if I agree with you for sure. Maybe concentration isn't a bad thing in this case.
Because it's really just concentration of market cap rather than concentration of profits or concentration of employees. It's not like they're dominating the economy. They're just dominating the market.
Yes, right. And like you said, it could... once everyone else catches up, it's just like they have a head start. And then once everyone else gets on that ground too, then it maybe evaporates. A rising stonk lifts all boats.
Should we have a numbers round?
Let's do it.
Why not? Let's do it. Elizabeth, do you have a number?
I do. My number is 29, and that's percent. And that's the percentage of the population that has something called money dysmorphia, where you become irrationally terrified of financial insecurity, or you think you're far more insecure than you are. And that number is the highest for Gen Zers, who 43% of whom have money dysmorphia. And the older generations have far less of it. 25% of Gen Xers have it. 14% of people 59 and over have it.
I am not going to ask how they're measuring it, but this so totally jibes with a million surveys that I've been receiving over the past few weeks showing like different attitudes to money. Gen Z overwhelmingly comes across as like the most financially sophisticated generation in the history of the world. Like, and you can call it dysmorphia, but like if you're a financial services company, that manifests as sophistication, weirdly. Like it manifests as a high savings rate, high propensity to hire a financial advisor, relatively high confidence that you're going to have a safe retirement, a relatively high level of financial literacy, and so on and so forth. All of these things, Gen Z is massively outperforming both the Gen Xers and the millennials. And maybe it's because they're driven by this sort of deep-seated insecurity and fear. But like, yeah, maybe it rhymes.
Yeah, definitely deep-seated insecurity and fear. And there's not that thing of when we're all Gen X here, right? Like when I was growing up, like making money was like, ew. Like you were going to be an artist, like, you know, you weren't going to sell out. Like no one talks about stuff like that anymore. It's like, God bless you if you could sell out. Like Gen Z is just like waiting to sell out. They want to make money. There's no ethic or ethos of like,
oh my God,
living for your art or anything like that.
I live in Manhattan
gone.
and I'm surrounded by like Gen Z investment bankers, and it's mildly depressing.
Because you're Gen X and you refuse to sell out.
Well, I'm Gen X, and I feel a little bit guilty when I sell out. Let's put it that way. My number is 7,500, which is the number of dollars that Ferrari owners have the option of paying to Ferrari every year, just as a subscription. So if you buy a Ferrari and then you pay Ferrari an extra $7,500 a year, then Ferrari will replace your battery in your car every 8 years, after 8 years, and then after 16 years. And if your battery like runs down or needs replacement before that, then they'll replace it before that. It's basically this thing that Ferrari has of addressing the big worry that people have about EVs, which is like what happens when the battery runs out. After a certain number of recharges, it stops being as powerful anymore.
I think they're supposed to last 12 years. So if you have a Tesla, it's going to die at some point.
How long do people hold on to their Ferraris
No,
for?
but that's the whole point, right? If you have a 50-year-old Ferrari, that Ferrari is probably worth $20 million now. The idea is that these things are assets, and people buy them partly because they expect them to rise in value over many decades. But if you have a 50-year-old EV Ferrari that, the battery died 35 years ago, then that is worthless. So it makes sense to pay them money to replace the battery.
Great income stream for the company.
And it's a nice, reliable income stream for the company. Exactly. Emily, what's your number?
My number is 2.7. That's hours. That is the amount of time Americans age 15 and over spend watching television every day. 2.7 hours.
Is that an all-time low?
Well, I'm not sure if it's an all-time low. It's about half the time Americans spend on leisure, half leisure time per day. And actually, yes, people are less likely now, the Labor Department said in their American Time Use Survey release, they're less likely to spend time watching TV now on an average day than they were 10 years ago. But it's not a huge difference. It was 79% 10 years ago, and now it's 74%.
But 10 years ago, they were probably watching like 5 hours a day, and now it's 2.9 hours a day. It's just like, they're still watching, they're just watching less.
Yeah, but it's not like they're going to video games, things like that. It's not. I wouldn't get.
So they're still looking at screens. It's just
Correct.
Different screens.
Different screens.
Yeah. I hope you guys are not looking at screens right now. This is the wonders of podcast, is you get to look out at nature or the road ahead or something that isn't a screen. But even if you are, thank you for listening. Stay tuned if you're a Slate Plus subscriber, because we're going to talk about potatoes, and you want to learn about potatoes. Otherwise, thanks to Jared Downing and Cheyna Roth for producing, and we'll be back next week with more Slate Money.
Five Below means hot stuff, cool prices. Get the trends in your feed for way less. Candy, beauty, tech, room decor, and more. Plus extreme value finds in our 5 Beyond shop. Yup, you could say we're kind of a big deal. Shop in stores and fivebelow.com.